So, you want a better future, do you? Then you must embrace the power of the dark side. Only then will you have the future you seek. Or you could, or you could just learn Plato and Marx and Rawls, and then maybe you'll have a nice future too. Hi everyone, it's Professor Dan here, bringing you the next installment in our series of videos. Professor Dan talks about stuff that he would have talked about if we were having face-to-face classes instead of doing all the stuff that we're doing right now. But don't worry, this is almost the same, other than the fact that Professor Dan cannot install special effects and other fun things during class. At least, not yet. Today, I want to start by talking about Plato. Now, I've already did a general introduction to Plato, and we talked about Plato and the family. Today, I want to talk about Plato and how he envisions the perfect state, or in his, what he called the perfect city. That is, the best kind of society that he thought we can have. And you find that in the Republic when Socrates and the rest of the people bring out what they call the city in speech. So this doesn't really exist anywhere. It's just a model of what a perfect city would be, and this is how we're going to go about finding this thing called justice. So in order to build this perfect city, we have to have general guiding principles. And the general guiding principle of this city is going to be one man, one job. And what they mean by that is that everybody's going to do that thing for which they are best suited. Now note that you can be best suited for something, but not necessarily be super good at that particular thing. Or, to put it a different way, you might be best suited for something, but not as good at it as, say, somebody else is. For example, there are people who are best suited to be NFL quarterbacks, and some of those people are better quarterbacks than others are. So something like that. When they start putting this city together, they decide that everybody's going to do that one thing they're best suited to do. And it starts out with farmers and builders and weavers, but in pretty short order, we get three general groups of people. We get guardians, we get soldiers, also sometimes called the auxiliaries, and we get craftsmen and laborers. So you have people who are what they say, or we would say, these are the people who are in charge, and they're the ones who actually know the best thing to do for the city and are willing to do it. And that's a very important sort of a thing. They don't think they know, they actually know. And you have the soldiers who enforce and protect. And then you have the craftsmen who do all the other kinds of jobs that we might have. And as I think I said in the previous video, everybody who's not one of these two people is a craftsman. So farmers, builders, and weavers, but also bankers and merchants and doctors and people like that. They're all in this group right here. Now, what makes this city work, according to Socrates and his cohort as they put it together, what makes this work is that those who have political power, the guardians, will have less stuff. That is, guardians don't have material wealth. Usually the people who are in charge of society have the most money and the most stuff, but not the guardians. They're actually going to live a pretty poor and not at all enviable life, living in barracks and getting paid in food, and not fancy food either, just plain food, and just having plain clothes. And then they have these marriages that we talked about in a previous video that are arranged for like 3 weeks and put together by festival and stuff like this. So they're going to have a less comfortable life. The craftsmen are actually going to have a more comfortable life. Not so comfortable that they get bad at their jobs, right? For Plato, you don't want to have so much stuff that you end up getting lazy at your craft. Just like if you have too little stuff, you can't do your job well. If you have too much stuff, you're not going to really want to do it very carefully anymore. But they're going to have a lot more stuff than the guardians are going to have. So this way, those who have less political power live a more comfortable life, and presumably that will make them then less enviable, or envious rather, of the guardians, right? These people don't have political power, but they have economic benefit. These people have political power, but do not have economic benefit. And this is the kind of city that they call an aristocracy, which means the rule of the best, right? The rule of the best, and best means those people who have it as their actual talent to rule the city. Presumably there's somebody whose actual talent that is, just like there are people who are talented soldiers and people who are talented farmers. There are people who are talented leaders, and we want them to lead rather than other people. Now, we're going to have to do a lot to make this happen. In addition to the life they lead, they're going to be educated in a certain way so that they put the state in front of their own needs. In fact, their own needs are going to be tamped down as individuals as much as possible so that they do what they do for the good of the state, right? Because there's a danger with any sort of system where some people are in charge and other people are not, right? The kind of system, we call this kind of system, by the way, an authoritarian system. So Plato's authoritarian system is about the best one that we might conceive of, because everybody does what they're supposed to do, and those who have less power are compensated by having more material wealth and comfort. But there's always a danger that if these people aren't educated and trained the best way they can be, they're going to start putting their own needs ahead of the needs of the city, and then the city will fall apart. And this is actually what ends up happening if you read further on in the Republic than we're going to for the sake of this video. You end up getting people who, instead of being those who ought to rule, you end up getting people who should not be rulers but who think they should be. And then they end up putting their desires ahead of the good of the city. So a friend of mine, the great Professor Wink, said that when the few put their own desires ahead of the good of the many, then the whole community suffers. And that's what ends up happening, because these people are no longer in charge. If the people in charge are really the best, they would not put their own desires ahead of the community. They put the community's needs first. This is the ideal city that we get in Plato. Now, in our next video, we'll look at something that's kind of similar to this, although without this stratification. And then we'll look at a third response. But we'll save that for the next video. So until then,